I asked if Martin Kove ever feels the urge to break away from being John Kreese and reveal another side of himself as Marty Kove. Despite being famous as the tough guy John Kreese, he's keen on showing a softer, more varied side beyond the tough martial arts character he's known for.
Well, I mean, I really like, I'm a romantic, and you'd never know that from the side of John Kreese. But, as the series progressed, the writers have written more vulnerable, texturized situations, especially, season 5, where I'm framed and thrown into jail, and now I'm a loose cannon out there. But I always enjoy, I really enjoy very emotional, moving films and plays. And, it's not the hard edge that happened in Karate Kid 1. So when I got the offer to do the series, I said to the writers, I don't really want to play him in that one-dimensional character because, I really like, softer, more emotional, situations as an actor. And I like to play, high-level emotions, even, crying on screen and becoming very romantic and all is a privilege, and I enjoy that. And so when I told them that, they said, we will work with you on that. And every season, there's been more and more flashbacks of the character being, more vulnerable than one expects him to be as we watched him in Karate Kid 1.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting you said that because I know I look at the character like he's misunderstood. He's not your typical villain, which I think the show has done a great job of that. It's shown a different side, how you mentioned. It's actually similar to something that you mentioned, Kevin Costner's character in Yellowstone. And I know you're probably a big fan of that because you love Westerns. In the past, you both compared those characters, and I found that interesting. Can you kind of elaborate on that a bit?
Well, yeah. I mean, I actually, I worked with Kevin and Wyatt Earp, and I've known him for a long time. I haven't seen him in a while. But John Dutton is exactly the way John Kreese would be if he was a landowner. He'd be that way, prejudiced and yet unquestionably, strong in the family line and making sure that everything is done with moral fiber and with a lot of integrity. And that's exactly the way, John Kreese is. And except, it's a few years. Actually, if you think about it, the whole family tree is like that. In 1923, Harrison Ford's like that. When Josh Lucas plays the younger John Dutton, I'm doing a movie now with Josh, and we talk about that. And there's a lot of integrity in those characters, and there's a lot of integrity in John Kreese,
Sean Connery was a huge inspiration for Martin Kove, motivating him to stick with his dream of acting. They even played tennis together, and Connery's influence on Kove extended beyond the screen, fueling his passion for both acting and sports.
What happened was I was accepted to go to university again for the 5th year in graduate school, drama class. It was NYU, I think it was NYU. And I was his stand-in a movie called The Anderson Tapes. It's one of those glorified extra roles, it's like 1972. And, you're just a stand-in and you get to meet and work and watch a lot of people like Sidney Lumet, who directed it, and Martin Balsam was in it. But just a slew of people, Diane Cannon, Chris Walken, and all these people are in this movie, The Anderson Tapes. And, I remember getting this acceptance to go for the 5th year of school. And I didn't know what to do. And I remember him standing on the street, and I just walked up to him and I said, what would you do in this? Would you continue education, or would you just go out there and, grab your portfolio and beat the streets and take a gamble on your life, and try to make money as an artist? And he, it was a classical repertory company that I was working with at the time. And it was staying with them full time or going back to school. And I said, what would you do, Sean? And he said, young man, if you can do Antigone, you can do anything. Which meant, if you can work in the classics with this repertory company, go for it. because you can always do television and the movies if you can do the classics. And that's what I did. I just, never went back to school and just worked in plays in Lincoln Center and developed a whole stage career there. But, when I saw him years later in 86, 85, I'd already done Cagney and Lacey and Karate Kid. I was a little more established. And I said, Sean, do you remember me? And he was playing tennis down the street from Fox on Motor, I think. And I said, do you remember me, Sean? I was your stand-in. And he says, no. And he didn't remember me. But it didn't matter. We played tennis and we got to be friends and sent him a couple of scripts. And he was a lovely guy. I worked on the set of Hunt for the Red October. And it was great to see him there. And, he remembered me then. It was a couple of years later. And then we became friends. And he was such an interesting guy, such a consummate actor, and just great.
Who used to win those tennis matches?
Well, he had a bad back, so we didn't play too often because, golf was his game.
Yeah.
And so, but I remember I won, because he wasn't good. He was really good in golf.
Of course. The thing I love about Sean Connery, he plays these badass roles, right? And it's like tough guy roles, right? And is that a reason why you looked up to him so much too? Do you think his portrayals in movies kind of influence you for your portrayals in movies as well? Like especially like in Rambo, playing John Kreese. Did you think it helped you a lot?
Well, not really. I mean, he mostly, we saw him as James Bond. He's still the best James Bond ever. And, everybody will agree with that. But, he had a wide range. I mean, the Molly Maguires and The Hill and a lot of movies he did right after he walked from the James Bond scenario. And then when he did The Untouchables, he got his Academy Award. And, I remember reading about him. He used to deliver milk in Wales. His family was poor. And then he used to deliver milk part-time. And then when he was 15, he was delivering milk full-time. And these are the things I read about because I just thought he was a consummate actor. And, he was, when you look back at things that he did, was it Darby O'Gill and the Little People? Darby O'Gill and the Little People is a movie he did before he got bombed. So it was circa Disney 1959. And the guy was still so handsome. And, he's a rugby player. And the guy just was so handsome. And it was James Bond, but it was a little Disney movie, about leprechauns.
That's awesome. That's so cool. No, the things you learn, I didn't even know a lot about this stuff. Like he has such an interesting life, career. So the fact that you even just got to know him and do all these things with him is pretty awesome.
One of the greatest, I remember he told me he had a conversation. I think it was Timothy Dalton asked him for advice, and he told Timothy Dalton, the best thing you can do as the new Bond is get yourself a good lawyer.
How come?
Well, because I think he was involved in a lot of lawsuits because producers are always trying to rip him off because he, became part of a lot of successful films, and everybody's got 2 sets of books, and everybody says, well, Star Wars didn't make any money in Ecuador. Raiders of the Lost Ark didn't do very well in Colombia. So there's no royalties coming out of South America,
It's all a money thing, right? That's all it is sometimes.
The 1980s is an era that I have a deep admiration for, and I've noticed that Hollywood loves remaking or continuing movies and shows from that era. The Karate Kid is a great example of this. It has been brought back to life in Netflix's Cobra Kai, and all the fans are loving it, including myself. But I asked Martin Kove what his thoughts are on this whole idea of Hollywood bringing back shows and movies from the 1980s.
Well, the revivals come from financially successful pictures, usually, and Back to the Future is on Broadway now. And I was in New York last week, and I was surprised. No, I wasn't surprised. I guess Back to the Future was such a successful movie, but you have a variety of things that are based on the success of the first one. And once you have a built-in audience for the first movie or the first play, Karate Kid is going to be on Broadway as a musical. It's called Karate Kid the Musical. And unless you have a successful movie, you have nothing to base it on. But you have all of your fans built in. So they'll go to see Karate Kid 2, Karate Kid 3, and then play, So once something is successful financially, you have a built-in audience for a sequel. So it's not so much the 80s. I think there's just a lot of successful movies of the 80s. And, Raiders of the Lost Ark, God knows, look what they've done with that. And Rocky was 76, 77. And, Sly did Stills making those movies. So I think it's just that era of the 80s was a really cool era for successful films. I think if we picked apart the 40s or the 50s, we could, how many times was Casablanca? They try to make it on television as a series, done as a movie of the week, and that was in the 40s. And all kinds of remakes. I think sometimes you feel people have lost their sense of imagination, and that's when they go back to trying to create a sequel or a prequel,
Yeah, I've noticed that too. It's a good thing you brought that up, because I notice a lot of times, like how we're talking about now, these revivals, they sometimes are great, but sometimes they're not, right? I wonder why sometimes these revivals, some of them don't end up panning out the way they wanted. And actually, I think it kind of hurts the original too sometimes when they try to do a remake. In my opinion, it kind of harms the original, in my opinion.
Well, it all depends. Most of the time, I think sequels are decent. The only sequel I think that was really, maybe Rocky 2 is really good, because I was around the time doing Rambo, and Sly and I were close. But Godfather is the only, you watch The Offer, and it's the making of The Godfather. And
Yeah, I love that.
It's brilliant, and every actor should see that, because it's all about tenacity. And I've told this to anybody who chats with me about what does it take to really succeed. It's tenacity. I tell it to my son. And Al Ruddy covered every obstacle imaginable to make this movie, The Godfather, work. Started off with a $4 million budget, and all kinds of problems. And not only turned out a complete movie, which was good, but it became a classic. And that sequel of Godfather 2 is as good, if not better.
Yeah.
It was brilliant.
Even, well, look at like Terminator 2, for example, right? And that's also due to the fact that it just, the technology obviously advanced too, right? So the CGI was better with the actual Terminator, right? But I think that one's better. I think Shrek 2 is better. I'm trying to think what other sequels are better. But yeah, there's a lot out there. Godfather 2, my opinion, I think Godfather 1 will always be a staple, but I think personally, like, more enjoyable, I just think Godfather 2. Just I like the flashbacks with a young Vito, and obviously Robert De Niro is great, and you got Michael actually going in and accepting he is the Godfather. And it's just, I think there's so many hills and valleys in that. Spoiler alert for people who haven't watched it already. Fredo dies, obviously, and he had to kill his brother. So that's, things like that. It makes for a really rich, interesting story, because they're building off the first one in a good way. Godfather 3, I still like it, but I know people don't. So I guess, I don't know. It's one of those type of things.
Yeah, you can dissect the Star Wars and this being as good as that. And
yeah,
there's so much. You look at the original Highlander, and it was a terrific movie for its time, brilliant. But then you look at all the special effects that come along now, and it dates the Highlander, and that was just a brilliant movie for its time. I love films that go back in time and then come forward again. I like the past more. I like to develop projects that are not contemporary, really go into the past. And I love when a movie goes into the past and it'll come like a time travel movie, but done well. So many times you used to watch Star Trek or some of those TV shows, and they'd go back in the past. They'd go to the Alamo, or they'd go to some place like, where Custer's Last Stand, and it was always, they didn't have the money to spend, and it made the past a debauchery,
Yeah.
So you got to
Yeah.
really, you got to really have enough money to literally illustrate the past when you do some time traveling in a movie. I love time traveling in movies, if it's done well.
Yeah. There's actually a director. I'm not sure if you know Robert Eggers. He does a lot of those movies as well. There's a movie
Mhm.
called The Northman, The Lighthouse, The Witch. He does movies that are more like in the 1700s or 1800s, like a lot really back in the day, right? But I think those are interesting too because I think there's still so much story to tell. I feel like we've done a lot of 70s, 80s, 90s stuff, which is good, and people can relate to it, especially people my age. But like you get so immersed into movies that are like that from like the 1700s, 1800s. Look at Napoleon. The trailer just came out for that. Looks amazing, And Joaquin Phoenix, I think he's going to do a brilliant job at that.
Yeah, I enjoy the past much more than the future and more than the present. I enjoy, I whenever I go to Texas, I was born on the day the Alamo fell. So I just love Texas. I've got a metaphysical connection there. And that is a lot of history there, and as far back as, further back than the Alamo. But it's always interesting. Texas probably would secede from America if they could, because they enjoy the bigness of the world and the independence of the world, you know. But certainly the past, I love period piece movies. I'd much rather see a period piece movie than something contemporary.
Absolutely. One thing I want to bring up too, because I know we talked a little bit about Sylvester Stallone a bit. I know you acted alongside him in the Rambo movie, Rambo First Blood 2. I also read that you guys are pretty close. And there's a picture I saw of you. I'm not sure if it was a couple years ago, but you guys bumped into each other. It was a cool picture. I know he has the new reality show, The Family Stallone. Are we ever gonna see you in that show? You guys hanging out together? Well, is there any plans for that or what?
I haven't hung out with him for a while. We bump into each other occasionally, different events. And, he's terrific, very talented fellow, very funny. And I think, there was a couple of magazines. I was on the cover of Cowboys and Indians a few months ago. And then I think the other one was Cigar Aficionado. And they went to him for comments on, Martin Kove and what he thought. And yeah, we had the same old personal manager in the 70s before we both came here. And his name was Kuno Spoonholtz. And Kuno used to get slide jobs as an usher in the movie theaters and get me a job as a Santa Claus in department stores.
Oh
And
my God.
those were the kind of jobs we got in the early days, in the early 70s. And then eventually we all, came out here at the same time. And there was two movies we did before Rocky, I think. We did Capone with Ben Gazzara and Susan Blakely. It's a gangster movie. And then we did Death Race 2000, which has become this bizarre cult movie. And, I remember him sitting in the trailer. It was a big motorhome for the cast. It was a Roger Corman movie. And he had this script. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm trying to get this boxing movie made." And that was probably 1975, February. And by 1976, I think, October, it was done. And the rest of it was iconic.
Rest is history. Yeah. Oh my
Then
God.
I worked with the same director. I worked with the same director on Karate Kid, John Avildsen,
Yeah, John
you know,
Everson. Yep. He's
who
brilliant.
directed Rock. And now I'm doing a movie with his son, John Avildsen's son, Ash, about the first lady wrestler. It's a wonderful story.
Oh wow. See, there you go. Another period piece, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, 40s, 50s. Yeah.
There you go, right? So that's right up your alley, man. You love those type of things too. There's also another thing I want to discuss, the relationship with your son. I had Jesse on my show a couple years ago, actually. He's fantastic. You know, you could tell that you and your family are so like family oriented, you know, and I love seeing that. I know you guys are actually working on a comic where he's the antagonist and you're the protagonist. Is that correct? Is there anything you could discuss about that? I'm so interested to hear about it.
Yeah, it's just something that came to us, and I wanted to help rejuvenate the Western, and Taylor Sheridan's done a great job so far, with Yellowstone in 1923 and 1883. So I've always wanted to, I've always loved Westerns, and I've never done a comic book before, and this is a comic book about a really badass killer, and he joins up with a 12-year-old, and they are on a revenge journey. And it turns out to be that my son is the head of the gang, and it's really interesting. They're monsters, and they leave me for dead, and I'm the founder of the gang, and kid doesn't know that. And the bottom line is, we bond together, and we learn, exchange moral fiber between the two of us. And I learn a little bit about life from a 12-year-old, and he learns about life from me. That's it. It's my partner is a man named Don Hanfield, and Don has done comic books before. They work with Thunder Comics, and it sounds like an interesting way to go. You 4 issues, and then do it as a series or a movie, and it's
Wow.
exciting.
What do you know when it's going to be releasing? Any info about
Well,
that?
the first issue should come out in a couple of months, and they're just finishing up the artwork now. It's really good art. I try to get close to a man named Mobius, who did heavy metal, and he did The Adventures of Lieutenant Blueberry, which is a comic strip character that I tested for in Paris years ago, and it's never come here. But the artwork is brilliant, just detailed and wonderful. I want to capture the grit of the West in this comic book. I don't want it to be, broad strokes, and it's not. I want to depict what we feel when we watch a Western film. I want us to feel as much as we can when we're watching the panels within a comic book.
I asked Martin Kove why there's a shortage of good Western movies these days, and being a big fan of the genre, it turns out he drew inspiration from it as well. He shared his thoughts on the genre's impact and how it shaped his appreciation for storytelling in movies.
Well, it's an overexposed genre. In the 60s, there were 35 Westerns on primetime TV. Mm-hmm. And if you talk to, I've been selling Westerns, in meetings for ages, and you get different opinions. Some people say, well, they don't like them in Europe anymore, which is nonsense, because they love, Sergio Leone and all that, in Westerns in general. Germany loves Westerns. South America loves Westerns. But you get distributors telling you, well, we can't get it, can't sell it. And, 1903 was pretty much the first Western, and pretty much almost the first movie. It was called The Great Train Robbery, and it was like 6 minutes long. And it was, Thomas Edison's attempt to make a film. And it was a Western. And I believe that, a lot of times the silent films were very popular because people were still alive who had lived in Tombstone. People were still alive who had lived in Wichita or Dodge or Laramie. And those places were always talked about. There were gunfights there. There was action there on that little 6-minute, 10-minute movie that you saw in the local theater, which was silent. So slowly everybody migrated because they were living in those places. And as time progressed, Westerns really, until television, Westerns were the staple of cinema. They were just making a lot of them because everybody liked to see them. And they were the first, in essence, the first medium of the silent film, of cinema. It's the heritage. the Western is the heritage of American cinema.
Absolutely. No, it's true. And like I said, I think people like Taylor Sheridan, yourself with the comic too. I think even with Quentin Tarantino, I just think it's gonna bring more awareness. I think people are gonna do a lot more with it because I still feel like there's still more of a story to tell with that, and I feel like there's still could be more creative ideas that can blossom. So no, it's definitely interesting. I actually want to play a fun game with you that relates to westerns. It's a this or that Western film edition. I got 5 movies here, and I just want to get your opinion on which you like more, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Cool. All right. Let's start off with the first one. Wyatt Earp or Tombstone?
Well, Wyatt Earp was more factual. Tombstone was more popcorn. It was an entertaining movie about Tombstone. Wyatt Earp was almost 3 hours long, almost like a trilogy of The Godfather. It was about the Earp family. And I have sat with professors and historians in Tombstone at a panel, and we discussed that all the time. And basically, that's the difference. That all of these characters who study these movies, they don't make films, but they study. And Wyatt Earp was very factual, and Tombstone was a little more entertaining when it came out, only because it had more of the glitz, and it was focused pretty much on Tombstone. It didn't focus on the Earps, their world from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they're both terrific pictures. Terrific.
Okay, great. How about The Magnificent Seven or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? Which one would you choose?
Well, the Magnificent Seven, the original one, is 1960. Steve McQueen, Yul Brynner, is sensational. It's got everything The Good, the Bad, the Ugly has, which is also my top 5. Both those movies are on my top 5. And in fact, the first 2 Wyatt Earps are my top 5. But the thing is that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is style over content. Like English say, there's so much style in the making of the film. It's almost hard to equate, because the original Magnificent Seven is about has a lot of soul. The relationship between the gunfighters is very rich, and great lines like that they're discussing, do they have any friends, and they say there's no friends, no enemies.
Classic.
It's classic material. John Sturges, the director, was brilliant. None of those people in 1960, except Yul Brynner, was a star. Everybody else was a working actor. McQueen had done The Blob and one other movie, and Charles Bronson hadn't gone to Europe to become a star yet. James Coburn wasn't a star, and Horst Burkholz was a working actor who was out of Europe.
Yeah.
So it was great. I mean, I really think and it's taken from a great story, The Seven Samurai. So The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is I met Sergio Leone, and I had such a good time chatting with him in Cannes about his westerns. And you can't really compare them, because one is truly a soulful character movie, with action, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a stylized movie of everything from Ennio Morricone's music to the cinematography to the character Clint creates, and to Eli Wallach, the brilliance of Eli Wallach, the 3 of them. I mean, Lee Van Cleef, just dark as ever, and Tuco, Eli Wallach was, the guy's a Jewish cat from Brooklyn, and he played Mexicans in How the West Was Won, in that Magnificent Seven, and there was a third one also that he played Mexican. So they're not comparable one against the other.
They're both good in their own way. They're both good in their own way.
Yeah, you've named 4 good movies.
The last one here we got is Django Unchained or The Hateful Eight. Got 2 Tarantino movies here.
Well, they're really, again, you've chosen these movies. Having worked with Tarantino on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yep.
And it was a Western sequence, and Django Unchained is, you work for Tarantino, you just working because you really love the guy. When I did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he said to me, Marty, and we're doing a Western scene with DiCaprio, and he said, it's the opening scene in the movie. And he says, Marty, I really like what we've done. Can we do one more? Can we take another take? And I said, sure, of course. And he turns around to the whole crew, 200 people, and says, and why? And everybody says in unison, because we love to make movies. So when you're working for a guy like that, I'm sure there was a vast amount of people coming from Django to Hateful Eight. I wanted to be in both of them, but I didn't get the part. And when I went up to him and I said, at the party at his office, I said, by the way, I've been bugging you, for years to get into a Western with you, Django and Hateful Eight. And I said, did you bring me in for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because of Cobra Kai? Because Cobra Kai is hot, or because I've been driving you nuts for 3 years? And he pauses, big smile, and he says, a little bit of both.
Love it.
But you're working for him it's working for him. The movie, they're both good movies, and they're full of surprises, and the characterizations are all crazy. And he's so imaginative and so interesting that, and he knows so much about movies, that it's a pleasure to work for him. You're working for this guy. You're not working to do a Western, because if he makes a movie about dry cleaners or shoemakers or table makers, it doesn't matter. You just want to be with him because he's so creative.
That's awesome. Well, Martin Kove, that was I think we're gonna wrap up. This was an amazing interview. We got through all the great questions. I loved hearing all your perspective on Western films. I can tell you're so passionate about it. That's why I really wanted to explore that today with you. So thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
And my pleasure. Take care of yourself.